Do you consider yourself a high achiever? Smart, driven, highly successful? I am so excited to have you. My name is Julia Arndt and I'm the host of the Stress Podcast. I will help you develop your stress resilience the same way you've developed your workplace superpowers. Learn peak performance tools to thrive at work and in your personal life. Let's get started. Hi everyone, and welcome back to the Stress Podcast. I am super excited to have a wonderful podcast guest for the show today and talk with her about a topic that I've been actually diving a lot deeper into over the last few weeks since I got my Fitbit. We'll talk about it in a second, but let's first welcome April Likins. Hi April, how are you today?
Hi Julia, it's so good to meet you. I'm really looking forward to our conversation today.
Yeah, me too. So, April, I don't even know where to start because there are so many cool things that I want to talk with you today about. But let's start with the first questions that I always ask my podcast guests. And the question is, where are you located? What time is it? And what have you been up to today?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'm in Virginia. I'm kind of in the middle of the state. So the Blue Ridge Mountains around me, it's really beautiful here. Nice. The weather's lovely, such a pretty area. I have been working today, so working with some clients. I took a walk with the dogs. I've got a newer puppy, so he's always ready to take a walk. So that was nice to get outside, get some fresh air and some vitamin D, and then just working on some writing projects too.
Wow, nice. And since you've already, talking about working with clients, do you want to tell us a little bit more about what you do and who you work with?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm actually a former designer turned board certified health coach who's really just fiercely passionate about helping women reduce their stress, find balance and optimize their sleep, really just so they can walk in their purpose and passions and just feel their best inside and out. So I live, like I said, here in Virginia with my husband and my dogs. He's a chiropractor. And when I'm not working with clients, I really love speaking about, topics like this that I'm passionate about and writing. And if you've got a great recipe, I love matcha lattes. That's my guilty pleasure. So I don't do coffee, but I do love a good matcha latte. And I'm always game for trying new things too. But I first got into health and wellness really probably 15 plus years ago when my dad was diagnosed with an aggressive and rare cancer at the time. And it was a prostate cancer. So he was 49 and typically, that's not one that's really aggressive, but at the time they gave him a 50-50 shot of surviving. And it was really devastating. He and I were really close. He was kind of like a best friend to me, in addition to a dad and a coach and a mentor and a lot of other things. But, I was devastated. So I really wanted to kind of look into what in the world, was causing this rise in all these issues that we've seen over the last few decades. What's the cause aside from genetics, and that's when I kind of dove into, epigenetics and how, our environment plays a role. So what's in our water, what's in our food, our stress levels, our sleep, all the different things too. So he and I revamped our lifestyles together. And I'm a true believer that really helped to prolong his life. And so I'm so thankful for that. But then a couple years, after that, he passed away. And even though I had made these really strong, healthy habits, just in just dealing with my grief, I kind of reverted back to my old ways of things. And so I was burning the candle at both ends. I wasn't sleeping well. I was staying up late. I wasn't exercising consistently. Wasn't eating consistently. And I was kind of using workaholism, kind of my old habits as a way to kind of cope. And I think that's something we're seeing a lot of right now too, right? It's been a stressful last few years for people. And it's really easy to turn to unhealthy habits, like workaholism or, binging Netflix or drinking too much or, any shopping, any number of things too, when we don't want to feel our feelings. So for me, I ended up doing that for a couple of years and I had a health collapse. It caught up to me. And when I say health collapse, I went from best shape of my life and top of my career to I almost couldn't get up for a year and a half. And so I ended up being just shuffled from doctor to doctor to doctor, 25 plus different experts trying to figure out what was going on with me. And I finally got hooked up with a health coach who just changed my life. And then ultimately decided to become a health coach, going to the Institute for Integrative Nutrition first. And then I went on to Duke, and then went on to get my board certification and a lot of other certifications in stress and gut health and that sort of thing too. But sleep and stress is something that I'm really passionate about, because I feel like those were a big contributing factor to that health collapse. And I am so passionate about helping others, really, because, I feel like I can't bring my dad back. Right. And I can't undo all this chaos that's happened in my life, with all these things too. But it's such an asset that I have all of this stuff in my story, that I just really want to be able to help people not have to make the same mistakes that I experienced, so that they can avoid all that and just really feel their best inside and out. This life is short and it's fleeting. And there's always a silver lining to everything that we go through. And even as that was a dark, dark time for me, and a really hard time, those hardships in life can be, fertile ground for growth and ignite us, something deeper in us, a passion. And so I'm grateful for that.
Incredible. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. I'd like to go back a little bit into kind of that trauma, or into that period where you were saying, I couldn't almost get out of bed for 1.5 years. How long ago was that? And then I'm really curious to hear, what did that health coach that you were working with at the time do differently than all of the doctors and professionals?
Yeah, that's a great question. So that was probably about 10 years ago. So 10 or so. And there was a slew of things that they ended up finding that were kind of going on with me. Anything from Lyme disease, endometriosis. I had been in the Caribbean right before that happened, and was there during the biggest mosquito outbreak, to Zika. And so there was aerial spraying over us while we were vacationing the whole time. So I had that to deal with. So it was just layers upon layers of things with me. And so that, most of the doctors that I was seeing were traditional doctors, not trained in functional, medicine, which gets to the root of what is going on, and so they weren't really sure how to handle me. And everything from traditional MDs to allergists to cardiologists to cancer doctors. I mean, I've seen them all, during that time. And so she was a functional health coach and nutritionist. So she was able to kind of, look at the root level, so we started looking at kind of like my gut microbiome and my hormones and what was going on. And that's different than the kind of health coaching that I do, because I'm not a registered dietitian, but she was. And the cool thing was, I just found her on a whim. And she had a very similar story to me and a health collapse of her own. So she was just 110% on my side, and just an amazing advocate to have. She really changed my life working with her.
Mm-hmm. Wow. And then how long do you feel like that work needed to go on until you felt like you were maybe more yourself again?
It's been years. Yeah. It took years to pick up the pieces. It's been years of work. Yeah. Many, many, many years of all of it, from anything, like I said, the hormones to detoxing to working on my sleep, stress management stuff, and then healing from a lot of those underlying things that were going on, like too. So stuff. Yeah. But I'm looking back, it makes a lot of sense, because when we are under stress, as I know that's your expertise, it weakens the immune system. And so me reverting back to these old ways of coping with grief, was not helpful for inflammation and helpful for my immune system too. And so it really probably was creating the perfect storm to allow some of this other stuff to just take over. The body is a lot like a computer, right? It can only handle so much, and then it collapses. Yeah. So I think that was a lot of what was going on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's super powerful. And you're touching on so many different topics that I would love to go in, because we could probably talk for 5 hours about all of this, because it's just super interesting. And stress, I think, especially I love actually that you were talking about grief and how you reverted back to all of these maybe unhealthier habits. And I think it just shows as well how important it is to deal, to manage our mental and emotional health, and to actually not ignore that, right? And to not just stuff it or distract it. And I think about that all the time, because I also go through periods where like my habits are better, and then I sometimes have periods where I'm frustrated with myself, even though I know better, right? I was actually just posting something on Instagram the other day about, we're not going to the gym once and then our muscles are so strong that we never have to go back again, right? It's really a lifestyle change that you have to kind of stick to, and it's a decision that you're making every single day again and again. And I've been having some lower back issues for a few years, and I know what I need to do, like I've seen all the doctors and PTs and massage therapists as well, and I know I need to work on like strengthening certain muscle groups. And do I do it? No, I always just like, start to be frustrated about it when it starts to hurt. And so, so it was a really powerful reminder again this year that I was like, man, it's so interesting, like we know all of these different things, we have all the information available nowadays, and we have even, the resources available, like even, the physical resources, like going to doctors or going to physical therapy and going to massage therapists, and they can tell us and give us so much information. But what do we really do with that information once we have it is really the deciding factor on how we're going to live our lives and how we are going to experience our lives.
Yeah, you hit on such great points in that too. It's like 2 points that I heard in that was, one, nobody can do the work for us, right? Like they can give you all of the things too, and the stretches or whatever, the treatment plan too. But at the end of the day, it's up to us to be our own advocate and really take care of our bodies. And second, our bodies are always communicating with us. I tell that to clients often. I feel like it's like the engine in your car, where you've got the engine lights, that occasionally tell you like, okay, it's time, your gas is low, or it's time to change the oil or whatever sort of thing. The body's always communicating with us, but we for a lot of us that either have trauma in our background or we played sports sort of thing, you learn to shut it off. And so eventually the body gets louder and louder and louder, to try to get our attention in that.
Yeah.
So those were great points to add too. I really appreciate that.
Yeah. So I want to talk with you specifically about sleep today, because I feel like I have probably talked about sleep on my podcast here and there, and I've done this podcast for over 3.5 years now. There's, I don't even know, 150 episodes or maybe even more than that.
It's amazing.
And I've never really had a sleep expert, and I'm very fascinated with sleep. As I mentioned, I just got the Fitbit a week ago, so I've been like really geeking out about like my sleep statistics. So I want to talk with you a little bit about that. But first of all, and kind of to just dive into this topic, I want to talk with you about why sleep is so important for performance. Because when you talk about, I think a lot of people know that sleep is somewhat important, but I've heard people say it's like this secret to performance. Like if you have good sleep, then you can be focused, then you can be put all of your attention and concentration on the things that are important for you, and you're less easy distracted and all these different things. Can you tell us a little bit more from a scientific research perspective, maybe why is sleep so important?
Yeah. And so, it's just kind of, I guess, backing up a little bit, we spend 1/3 of our lives sleeping, right? So a significant portion of our days, our weeks, our months, years, are sleeping. And there's so much research on sleep really that, that it affects things like you were talking about, affects our, attention, our cognition, our mood, our decision-making, all, and blood sugar, blood pressure, any number of things too. And it's fascinating that when you kind of look at the history of sleep, it was revered prior to the Industrial Revolution. So up until that time, interestingly, all the top like scholars and leaders very much, embraced sleeping, and they slept a lot. So back then the average person slept like 10 to 12 hours, which is radically different than what we get now. And so it's really gotten this bad PR rap since then, and I hear often from people, there's just this misconception, that we've heard these phrases like, oh, you snooze, you lose, or I'll sleep and I'm dead sort of thing too. And especially, with this rise in the hustle culture that we've seen, that's, you got to hustle 24/7 if you want to be successful, and, and all this stuff too. And that, we can get into that toxicity, and, and I know I'm preaching to the choir there on how dangerous that is from just a stress standpoint. But I think a lot of people have, this misperception that, sleep's a waste of time. And what's amazing is that science has actually shown that it's not the case, that our brain and body are not dormant during that time, but there's actually areas of the brain that are just as active, if not more active than when we're awake, particularly in that deeper sleep and the REM sleep too, and the brain and body is just doing incredible things. I mean, it's categorizing and consolidating memories, wiping things that don't need to be there. It's detoxing our brains, of proteins that are linked to cognitive diseases. It's literally forming new neural pathways. It's lowering our cortisol levels, which is, really helpful for stress. And then that restorative sleep is so critical for the cognition, our mood and our creativity too. So I always tell people, like, if you want to feel your best inside and out, it's really starts with sleep, and it's foundational to everything. Like I said, sleep regulates our hunger, it regulates our metabolism, insulin, our mood. There's a lot of data here coming out the last few years on mental health and sleep. And it's very important to our immune system, which is, more important now than ever, to have that healthy immune system. But just a few stats too, like I was just in preparation, kind of re-looking up some things too. And so the Journal of Clinical Sleep Medicine has actually said chronic sleep loss is associated with an increased risk of mortality and contributed to cardiovascular disease, diabetes, obesity, and cancer, which is pretty alarming, right? And so that's kind of straight from the source too. So back to your question, you kind of asked me, what is the connection between like sleep and performance? And so there was a really interesting study that Stanford University did. It was like way back in the 2000s, early 2000s, I can't remember which year it was, where they were really exploring the connection between sleep and performance. And they were initially kind of working with the swim team on experimenting with increasing their sleep and just seeing if anything would happen. They had kind of low expectations. They were just curious about, okay, well, we'll just check it out and see. And so they were like mind blown with the results that they saw. And so there was a drastic, just overall improvement in their athletic performance completely across the board. And there was quite a few of the collegiate swimmers that went on to shatter personal records. And so then they later went on to study the basketball team. And so they published this other study later in the 2000s. I want to say it's around like 2011 or so, and they literally said, and I'm quoting it, they concluded, sleep likely contributes to an improved athletic performance, reaction time, and mood. The improvements we saw included shooting time, sprint times, reaction time, mood, fatigue, and vigor were all observed with increased total sleep time. So those studies are, I think, really fascinating. It shows that there is a direct connection. And of course, there's other studies as well that have linked lack of sleep to almost like being drunk, like driving drunk, that, our cognition and our reaction times, we don't, just like, if someone's ever been drunk, they're not always aware of their how they're reacting to things when they're in the moment of maybe being inebriated. The study showed that it was very similar with sleep deprivation, that you're not aware that you're reacting, much slower to things, and you aren't as cognitively sharp in that because you're so sleep deprived too. But just some other fun stats, most everybody knows who basketball legend, LeBron James is. And he's talked openly about sleep and how it is so crucial for him being one of the best basketball players in the world. And that it was kind of shocking to look this up, but he gets like on average 12 hours of sleep. So people often joke that if he's not playing basketball, he's sleeping. And then he takes naps on top of that too. But, Jeff Bezos of Amazon, has talked at length about, how he makes sure he gets 8 hours of sleep a night. So you're seeing, Michael Phelps talked about it, Stephen Curry, a whole slew of them. So you're really seeing this trend here the last few years of athletes coming up and really openly talking about sleep and showing how it makes a big difference in their performance. A lot of them actually work with sleep coaches. And then you're seeing a lot of CEOs really embracing that too, and realizing that, if they want to make good decisions and lead companies really well, they got to make sure they are getting in the high quality sleep.
Yeah.
So it's kind of fascinating.
It's super fascinating. And, you're bringing up a really cool point, which is decision making. And I always think everyone has had the experience that when they just kind of wake up in the morning and they haven't had a good sleep, or they haven't had enough sleep, that the decisions they're making throughout the course of the day are not as good as they could be, right? Like, I'm just thinking, oh, you're tired, like, and then from a mental capacity, maybe you don't have the, that toughness, that mental toughness to be like, okay, I am going to go for a run now, right? Because it's because I'm already not feeling on top of things. So I feel like really the quality of your decisions goes drastically down as well, both what you decide to do for yourself, and then obviously it translates also into maybe your workday, right? I can relate to that as well, in the sense of like, what do I choose to eat in the morning, right? Like when I don't have that mental toughness of like, I want to be healthy and I want to be strong all the time, then I go to the bakery and pick up something sweet, which I know I shouldn't always do, right? Or things like that. I think it's just really these small decisions, obviously, that maybe once, here and there is obviously no problem at all. But if you are under high levels of stress and you don't get enough sleep, and then, you slowly but surely get more and more into those new not so good habits of making these poorer decisions. And I also always think the human mind, we're like in a way such lazy people, so of course we're always choosing kind of the least resistant path, right? So we're choosing that like short-term reward instead of like making decisions more for like the long term. So so decisions for me is something that always resonates really deeply, because I know that when I'm not well rested, I'll be grumpier, I make poorer decisions, I don't move my body as much. We can all relate.
Right?
So
I was going to say, it's, to add on to that, not to interrupt you, but it's a beautiful point, and I hear it all the time, and it's the same with myself too, that, I see with clients too. So you, for example, like you said, you get a night's sleep, so then you're drinking more caffeine a lot of times to try to like cope during the day. So then your sleep is off even worse the next night. And then it creates this like crazy cycle. And so, because you're, then the next day you'll have more cravings, so you can stress eat a lot more. And so because you've eaten something you feel like you shouldn't have, you throw your exercise out the window, and then it just creates this whole like snowball effect. Where it can be a tricky cycle to kind of break out of. It's hard.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think we can all relate to that. So obviously we all hopefully know that it's important. Wait, actually, let's start with how many hours of sleep is the right amount of sleep. I think that there's so many different opinions about that. Is it 7 hours? Is it 6 hours? Is it 9 hours? LeBron James says he's sleeping 12 hours.
That's a lot.
What is the right? That is a lot. What is the right amount of sleep?
Well, first off, if I've slept 12 hours, like I feel like I have a hangover. Like, have you ever slept too long? You just, I don't know. Like, I feel like there's a limit where if you sleep too long, like you don't feel good either.
So 100%. So it's really interesting. So yesterday was the first time on my Fitbit app that I had a sleep score of 91, which is excellent. And it was the night that I slept the longest throughout that week since I started tracking my sleep, which was like, I think 9 hours and 11 minutes. And honestly, I felt the most tired yesterday. Yeah. It was funny how and that's, another interesting thing, how like data is data, then you still have to interpret it, and you can still interpret it in different ways. And it doesn't really mean in my opinion, if you have an excellent sleep score now, you're like super performant. I actually felt more tired yesterday, and so I was like, this is kind of interesting. And today it says I have a fair sleep score because I only slept 6.5 hours last night, and I feel great.
That's so crazy. Yeah, it is confusing.
So I think it's confusing sometimes to look at that data. But what I think is depends really on what you've done and what you need, right? So I know that when I've exercised a lot, when I had like a really big workout, I'm training for a bike race at the moment, and I sometimes go on like 4 or 5 hour bike rides.
Wow.
I need more sleep, and then I'm tired, and then I feel like then I need more hours of sleep because I can tell that I recuperate. Or yesterday I had, I've been talking about like the pains in my body. I feel old when I say this, but I've been having some like neck issues and some muscular issues. And I think that's why yesterday, like I actually went to a massage Tuesday night for 2 hours and then had that excellent sleep score yesterday.
Yeah.
And I think I was still so tired because my body was still moving through, like you maybe releasing the toxins, and like I was still tired because my muscles still hadn't fully recuperated from that. So I feel like data is data, but you always need to take it with a grain of salt. I feel like, I don't know, do you have another opinion on that?
Yeah, it is. And so to answer your question, all the sleep experts and like the American Academy of Sleep Medicine recommends, anywhere between like 7 to 9 hours a night for most people. Under 7, it's certainly under 6, you can start seeing measurable changes the next day, again, in things like insulin, blood pressure, reaction times, switching on genes that we don't want to get switched on, different things too. And so to your point, it's really a matter of finding your sweet spot. So, it's kind of experimenting with, okay, so what number do I feel the best the next morning? And so for some people it's 7, for others, for me, I thrive more on like 8, sometimes 8.5, but also to your point too, depending on your activity level, stress levels, if you're recovering from, an illness or, or just during seasons of life, like that number will change. And so it just kind of goes back to just something I always tell my clients, and I'm sure you do too, is, listening to your body daily and just kind of asking yourself what you need daily to thrive. And so that number may change for you, and ebb and flow a little bit too. So you may find that you have a number, but it might fluctuate a little bit just based on what's going on in your life and in that day and time and season too. So for you, you've been doing some heavy training. And that, you probably need some extra recovery time, because that is, again, part of what the body is doing during sleep is recovery. And then you had that wonderful 2-hour massage, which sounds lovely. It's like, sign me up for that. That sounds really amazing. And probably helped you sleep better too,
I went straight to bed after that.
Yeah. Relaxing you. And
I always say that I'm like a self-care pro now, like with the line of work that we're both doing, you know exactly what you need, and like you listen to it, and it's really fun. It feels really good to kind of do that. But I'm sure a lot of people that are listening are like, where do I start, right? Again, I have so many things that I want to share and that I want to talk with you about, but there's 2 more things that I want to say before we maybe go a little bit more into how can people start.
Sure.
One thing that you said and that really resonates really deeply with me is the amount of time that we need for sleep. I think there's no right or wrong. I think it's really important that we are finding what works best for us, and that we're not so strict with ourselves, and that we find flexibility. And like, same for me, like as I just said, like some nights I have 6.5 hours, some nights I have 9 hours, some nights I usually average on 8, I would say as well. But it doesn't have to be so. And I think as peak performers and perfectionists, we're oftentimes like, I need a specific guideline, otherwise it's not going to work for me, and I think like finding that flexibility, as you said, like really testing it out and seeing what works best for you is really what you can do. And it will also change over the course of your lifetime. Like I know 2 years ago, I was going through kind of a breakup, and it was like really emotionally hard for me. And so I needed a lot of sleep, like lots and lots of sleep. I slept so much, right? Because like you're crying a lot, but you're going through grief, and you're going through that emotional heaviness. And so I almost felt like I needed more sleep to probably, because, my brain was maybe coping with all of these different things. And so I felt exhausted all the time, and I was tired all the time. And I took naps during the day and meditations, because I just had to really deal with what came up for me during that time. Yeah. And so that happens as well. It's all part of the human experience and all part of the process.
It is. And you're right. It's like, with anything in health, I feel like so much of, well, first, there's no one size fits all, right? So what works for you is going to be different than what works for me, what works for, people listening too. And so a lot of it's just experimentation, and really just kind of seeing what works and what doesn't. And, for some people, like having sleep monitors can be really helpful. For others, it actually gives them anxiety, because, when on the nights that they have lower scores, they hone in on that, and you can feel worse about your day of like, oh, well, I didn't sleep well. So, that sort of thing too. So it can kind of create anxiety around sleep too, or this dependency on the device to tell you how you feel, and not
such an important point,
not tuning into your body, and saying like, okay, regardless of what this thing says, because it may or may not be accurate, this is how I feel today, and tuning into, just what your body's telling you and that intuition.
And how you feel. Yeah, 100%. Wow, such an important point. 100% agree. And then the other thing that you mentioned earlier, which I do want to highlight again, because it's so important, because I know that my peak performers oftentimes thrive on a lot of coffee, is the caffeine intake. I was working with a client a few years ago, and we like started working together, and just like literally like she signed up as a coaching client, and then like a week later she told me that she went to the hospital, and then she had like an anxiety/panic attack, and we were like starting to like work together on like getting her out of that burnt out state, and I don't even know how we got there, but we were talking, I think, about her anxiety or about her panic attack, and I said to her, I'm like, how much coffee do you drink in a day?
Yeah.
And she said to me, oh, I really like nitro coffee, which is, this really, really high caffeine coffee. And she's like, I drink about like 3 or 4 of those a day. And I couldn't believe
that's a lot.
That's because I'm very sensitive to coffee. So like I've tried the nitros, just of course because they're frothy and they're yummy, and like I was curious, and I would have a sip and I would feel like the caffeine. And I was like, wow, shaking. I'm like, you're drinking really, really high caffeine. Maybe you should try and just like cut it out, and just either just have one in the morning and then drink tea, or do something about it. And so she did, and she couldn't believe how strongly her anxiety and stress levels went down just from that one simple change.
Yep. It's you hit on a big one too, because it's just, again, it's like anything, can be a good thing, but too much of a good thing can be a bad thing, right? So we can go overboard with it. And caffeine's one of those things that, if you're prone to anxiety, it's like throwing gasoline right on,
for sure,
on top of that. And that can really magnify it and make it worse. But so I was listening to actually a sleep podcast not too long ago from Dr. Chatterjee. I don't know if you follow him. I love to follow him. He's, one of the top, MDs in Europe. And he talks a lot about all this stuff and the stuff that, we enjoy listening to. And he was talking about how, people don't realize, the caffeine can, if you have a cup of coffee at noon, by midnight, like a quarter of that is still in your system at midnight, just because of, metabolism and that sort of thing. And so he's like, why in the world would nobody on their right mind would drink, a half a cup of coffee, at midnight and try to go to bed, instinctively we know that. But I thought that was really fascinating. But it's one of those things where, again, it depends on the person, but all the sleep experts that I've, and the research that I've done, they all recommend, somewhere between noon and 2 as the cutoff, and a lot of them lean towards noon. But if you're somebody that's more sensitive, and I've seen this a lot with clients, you might need to, and myself as well, you need to back it up further. So it might be 11 for you in the morning, and it could be 10, is the cutoff too. and it's definitely been the same sort of situation where I've worked with a lot of clients that are having trouble sleeping, and we talk through like how much caffeine they're drinking, and and they're like having drinks, caffeine coffees at like 2, 3, 4 o'clock just to get through their work day. Because I work with a lot of really just high achieving professionals with really demanding jobs. So when we've backed off, it's been same sort of thing where it's just life-changing for them. They have to, it's one of those things where, until you're on the other side with a lot of health and wellness stuff, you don't realize like, oh, wow. Okay. So that is really creating, a problem there. And so caffeine's a big one for people. And interestingly too, I've heard from people like, oh, well, because you sometimes hear the excuse, well, I'm one of those people that can drink coffee and go to bed. Still studies,
or you can drink coffee and it doesn't affect you at all, right?
Yeah, but that's the study. Yeah, exactly. And I've heard that too. And the studies actually still show that's not the case. The sleep studies that have done on people that claim that they can do that, they do sleep, they can go to bed, but it drastically reduces the deep sleep cycle and the REM cycle. And again, those are like, those are the ones, the sleep, 3 and 4 that happen later in the evening. That's where the magic happens, and the restorative stuff, the work really happens, and not having that function properly long term is linked to a lot of things we don't want. So yeah, it just really depends on person to person. And again, it's something to just kind of experiment with. Some people that find they just can't have it at all. But one other thing I was going to mention, so if you're somebody that likes the taste of coffee, of course you can do decaf, which decaf isn't 100% caffeine free. And some of them actually have still quite a bit of caffeine in them. But dandelion tea, I don't know if you drink that, but I drink it from time to time. And I've tried a ton of different brands. I love it's Tishino or whatever. They have a couple yummy different brands, but it has a very similar flavor profile to coffee, but it's really beneficial to your liver and detoxing and like gut health and all of that too. So it gives you that same kind of taste as coffee. It's very close, but without, the crash and the spike and messing up your sleep and all of that too. So if you haven't tried it, I'd be curious to hear if I'm very curious what you think of it. Yeah.
I usually drink decaf. I really like decaf a lot, because I do like the taste of coffee a lot. Yeah. But yeah, I'll try that out. So one thing that I want to mention, if people are listening right now, because you mentioned kind of that dip in the afternoon and getting super tired maybe after lunch and then going back to work and having to like, trying to get back into like being focused and productive for the rest of the day. Something that's really helped me, and it took me a really long time to kind of get into that, as I always say, like, I'm literally my own guinea pig, and I try a lot of different things out, and I try to be more aware and notice things. And so one of the things that I've tried out, because I don't really drink coffee anymore in the afternoon, it's very rare that I do that, and it would be just decaf, obviously. I lay down for like a meditation, and usually I fall asleep when I do a meditation for like 10, 20 minutes, or I go outside and move my body. And it's really interesting because I feel like both things have kind of the same effect, and you just need to kind of hone in as well of what works for you and what maybe do you need in that moment. Is it more a nap that you need, or is it more just getting outside and getting out of your room and your chair and moving your body? But and again, it's so hard to make that decision when you are in that dip, right? It's like it's more the healthy, good decision to like go outside and move your body or lay down, instead of just going down to your nice Nespresso machine and having a nice capsule that you really enjoy drinking, right? But yeah, that's been something that honestly every time blows my mind, how much it changes my whole being. Because again, when you are already in that sleepy state, it's so hard to make that smart decision instead of going for the easy decision, right?
It's true.
But if you try it out, that's something that's really helped me like get back into work mode, like after 20-30 minutes, and be like, wow, I actually feel a million times better now.
I don't do power naps. I've never been a napper, but going outside can do wonders for me too. And especially, a lot of times if you are having that crash, I mean, sometimes it can be adrenals, it can be blood sugar. I mean, there can be, sometimes it can be you just, you've been at the computer like way too much today and your body's like, I've had enough. I need a break, sort of thing too. But, just getting outside and being out in sunlight, of course, is great for vitamin D levels. It's great for your mood, the fresh air, all of that. But the light hitting our eyes, can stimulate our adrenals, which can give us a little bit more energy too. It can do a lot of different things in the body too. So that's one of my favorites. I love to just get outside or move, and just light movement or exercising can be really helpful too when you're having those dips. And sometimes it just depends on the person. Sometimes you need a snack. That could be, the cause too. So
or a glass of water, right? Because your brain might be dehydrated.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Are there any other foods that you can think of? I love the idea with the dandelion tea. Is there anything else where you're like that makes you more sleepy or less sleepy or?
Well, there's certain like sleepy teas that can be really helpful with like chamomile and lavender and, ashwagandha teas can be really nice too. That's an adaptogenic herb that can be really calming to the nervous system in there. So if you've got a good health food store near you or like a Whole Foods or something like that too, they often have, just a whole section of really great teas to kind of experiment with too. But then that's double-sided too, because if you drink that too late in the evening, right, then like you have a different problem, right? Because you're waking up because you have to go to the bathroom too. So it's kind of a fine line there for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So when you have a client that comes to you and has severe sleep issues, right? There's people that have really difficulty sleeping. Where do you start?
Well, that's hard, because, if you want to get to, it might be helpful to kind of talk up to like general listeners that maybe aren't having like severe issues. And then we can touch on that too, because that could require, they really need to talk to their doctor about that. And they may need a sleep studies test and that sort of thing too. But, for the kind of the average person, there's a couple tips that I like to share with clients that can be really helpful for getting better sleep. First, it's first and foremost making sleep a priority, like we were talking about, and changing how you see it as, oh, this is just a waste of time versus, no, this is really crucial, to my longevity and my health and everything else too. And finding your sweet spot and making that a priority too, but also creating a relaxing bedtime routine. I also like to follow Dr. Matthew Walker. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but he's one of the world's sleep experts. And he has said on numerous occasions, he said, sleep is like landing a plane. When you're landing, and you're on a plane, you don't just nosedive and, aim for the runway, right? Not if you want to survive. So sleep is very much similar. The body has to kind of gradually descend and unwind, to get ready for bed. So it's similar to kids, if you've had kids, you don't just throw them in bed and say, good luck, kids, I hope you go to sleep to your 2 or 3 year old. There's this whole process, you've got to do bath time and then maybe you do story time or you do some playtime or whatever you do. There's this routine, to get them ready for bed and to signal, to them and their body, it's time to go to sleep. And as adults, we need those same signals. So you can't just, bang out emails and, scroll on Instagram and do all the things, that you're doing, read the news and then jump right into bed and hope to sleep. It's way too overstimulating to the body. Another tip that's really helpful for people too is sticking to a schedule. Our bodies really thrive on having a natural circadian rhythm, which is really, that's just that internal process that the body uses to regulate, our sleep and wake cycles too. And so, sticking to a roundabout schedule can be really helpful too. So trying to kind of get up around about the same time, and go to bed kind of about the same time, even on the weekends, so if you go to bed at 9 hypothetically on the weekdays, you wouldn't want to be staying up till like midnight on the weekends too. Because that can really throw off all of that too. Of course, your bedroom needs to be really optimized for sleep. I talk to a lot of people that just aren't as familiar with that too. So an optimal bedroom, should be dark, quiet, and cool. And I found it surprising when I read this years ago that the National Sleep Foundation said the average, ideal temperature for your bedroom really is around like 64, 65 degrees Fahrenheit, which is pretty cool. And so it's somewhere, it varies. It's kind of like that sleep number, it varies for people somewhere between like 60 degrees Fahrenheit and like 67 too, because if you're too hot, it's really difficult to fall asleep too. And just like we were talking about caffeine levels, and different sensitivities, where it sounds like you and I are a little bit more sensitive to caffeine. Different people are more sensitive to ambient light in the room. And so there's been some recent studies that have shown too, that just like small amounts of light, we're talking like the alarm clock light, or a little bit of light kind of creaking through the blinds, like that can be enough for people to not be able to sleep. So for some people, it's really helpful to have like, the blackout shades, that just really, especially if you've got a lot of light coming in from the street and other houses and that sort of thing, that can be really helpful. Or just sleeping, with a sleep mask, or just turning those devices over so that they're not, kind of glaring in the middle of the night. And kind of to that point, it's really limiting those blue light devices. At least experts recommend at least an hour before bed. I'm more sensitive, so for someone like me, 2 hours seems to work better. And the reason being, those the laptops, our phones, iPads, whatever we're using and we're looking at mimics, and as do bright overhead lights, to mimics natural sunlight. So it suppresses our natural melatonin production, and it actually tells our body like, hey, don't go to bed right now. It's not time to go to bed. It's daytime. And so it can make going to sleep, really tricky too. In that we touched on caffeine. So, that's another one, like we said, to kind of watch out for too. And just being mindful of stressful things before bed, like definitely not reading the news before bedtime, if you don't want to have anxious thoughts and all of that too. And then a couple of things that can improve or contribute to a lack of sleep too can be, not eating late at night. The body needs a couple hours to digest. So I hear often from clients, if they eat too late dinner, they just feel uncomfortable, and it's harder for them to sleep too. The other thing is, the body raises the core temperature when we're digesting. And so we need that lower core temperature, to get that optimal sleep. And if it's counteracting it, trying to process our food, that's going to dysregulate our core body temperature and make it harder to fall asleep too. And then alcohol is another one, that I hear often from people, because that I talk about with clients, because it's, and I'm a firm believer in, all things in moderation. So, but there's this misconception that, alcohol is a sleep aid, and it isn't. It initially you can fall asleep maybe a little bit faster, but often people wake up later in the evening, just due to, again, raising of your core temperature, and it's taxing on your liver, because your liver's got to process it too in the middle of the night. But studies have shown it actually really decreases, again, that REM sleep and the deep wave sleep that's so crucial for our health too. So any other thoughts or things that have been helpful for you or your clients too with getting better sleep? Those are just kind of my go-to top kind of general
great
tips.
Yeah, those are really great. I was just laughing and smiling when you were talking about like the alcohol intake, because I'm geeking out with one of my friends at the moment about our statistics on our watch. And she said that one of the big things for her was the body temperature, and relating it to like when she's drinking red wine at night. How much that actually increases her core body temperature, and how she can see how that affects the quality of her sleep. So
that's so fascinating.
Super interesting, so fascinating. That was one thought that I had, and then just the other thought that I had was when you were starting to talk about like actually kind of that mindset change. I was like, I really love to sleep. I am still surprised when I talk to people and they're like, I just need 5 hours of sleep and like it's not important, or like you can sleep when you're dead, kind of a thing, you know. I'm always like, really? I love to sleep. Like I genuinely love to go to bed early. I like love sleep. And you know, I think one of the things maybe you haven't touched upon, but what's really important for me as well is when we're talking about the optimal bedroom is also sheets, like just like having nice pillows and like, I really, again, I love that kind of stuff. And I love to create just like, you know, my cocoon and like being comfortable. And I think sometimes people are not aware of that mattress. I mean, it can go down the rabbit hole of mattress, you know, covers, bed, pillows. I always sleep with the window open, no matter if it's in the winter time or in the summertime. Like I love my bedroom to be very cold. Things like that. But yeah, I think you're touching upon the most important things.
Yeah. Sleep, I mean, sheets can make or break us, right? Yeah. You know, and I love them myself. I have a lot of clients that really love bamboo, you know, sleeping on bamboo sheets because they're like a lower, they're cooler than regular sheets, but they're also antimicrobial and they help to kind of just keep us cooler throughout the night too. And so, yeah, that can make a big difference too. But to your point is really just making your bedroom a relaxing room and keeping that space, you know, really experts recommend, again, you know, like sleep and sex, and that's it. So like no TV watching in your bedroom. I mean, like light reading and stuff like that too. But, you know, if you are doing a lot of activities in your bedroom, it can signal to, again, your body, like, this is not a space that I sleep in. This is also an exciting room where I do lots of other things too. And so it can just, you know, create complications too. But I was also having a thought when you were talking that, you know, I was talking to a client recently who I've loved working with, like he's amazing. But when he first we worked together for probably a year and a half. And he initially came to me like, I don't need to sleep, like, you know, like whatever, you know, he's a high performer, like he's into, you know, like working out, all the things too. And just, he was like, no. And so initially I said, let's talk about that, you know, and why, and kind of, we talked through that a little bit, but eventually he started tracking his sleep. And when he was able to track it and track his blood pressure, that's when he had this whole light bulb like moment, because he, you know, over time, he was able to look at the trends and he could see firsthand that on the nights, just like the studies that we were talking about earlier, on the nights that he got really bad sleep, his blood pressure was a lot higher the next day, you know, and that was consistently happening over and over again, where again, the next time he had really poor sleep, his blood pressure was right back up again too. And then he started to kind of from there notice other things. You know what, on the days that it's, you know, I don't sleep well, I'm not eating as well, and I'm craving, you know, these other things, or my mood is, you know, my mood is grouchier. So it's always interesting how, you know, how when you just, you know, treat it as an experiment, there's so much interesting data that you can just, you know, uncover about yourself of what makes you thrive and what you feel, you know, how you feel your best. And it's just a lot of it's trial and error.
It is. It totally is. Yeah, absolutely. And I love that we're talking about how to really use that data to your benefit and not to, like you were saying earlier, not to make you feel more stressed or more anxious about, or like make that data point influence your, you know, the rest of your day. Like that shouldn't happen either. There's 2 more questions that I have, but I'm like, you know, we'll talk about them. The first question was, what do you do when you have a hard time falling asleep? And the second question was, what do you do when you wake up at night and have a hard time going back to sleep?
Yeah, and those are such great.
And we have talked about a lot of things already. So is there anything else that you can think of when that happens?
Yeah, well, you know, when people are waking up in the middle of the night and they're having a hard time, you know, falling back asleep, sometimes, you know, there's different reasons, you know, it can be, you know, it just depends on the person. So some of the things we touched on earlier, you know, for some people listening, you know, it may be, again, eating dinner too late in the evening, or it could be drinking water too late in the evening. For some people that, you know, that just that'll keep them up all night too. So, and if you're going to the bathroom multiple times a night, obviously that's going to disrupt your sleep too. But, if it's due to stress, often that's the case for a lot of people that I work with. They'll have this restless mind kind of in the evenings, or they feel like their mind's clear. Then the second they hit the pillow, it's like there's the loop and all the things, and that, they have a hard time, falling asleep, and it's stressful. And so that's really, where finding healthy ways, to address the stress can be really helpful too. But, just from a practical standpoint, if people are having trouble falling asleep, first and foremost, deep breathing, or doing a simple meditation can be one of the quickest and simplest ways really to calm the nervous system and switch on the parasympathetic rest and digest system too. And there's been quite a few studies actually on meditation reducing insomnia too. So it can just be, just breathing in, for 5 seconds, holding for a few seconds, and then breathing out. Heart focused breathing can be really helpful too, or even heart rate variability. That's a whole different topic where, measuring that can be really helpful too. Just doing a simple body scan can be helpful for people too. And that's where, you just kind of start with your head, and then you just focus slowly all the way down on your body and kind of every single area. And you're just noticing any sensations, any tension, any pain, and just observing things really from kind of a non-judgmental, standpoint, and just allowing each area of the body to relax. And that's kind of a practice that helps you kind of get back into your body and to be more in tune with the signals of what it's trying to tell you, like we were talking about throughout the day. And, but if after, you can't go to sleep for, 20, 30 minutes, it can be really helpful to just get up and go to another dimly lit room, just do something relaxing. So it could be just, reading a book, something light, nothing too crazy reading wise. It could be stretching, doing some yoga. Maybe it's meditating, could be coloring. I have some clients that really, they enjoy coloring and doing something creative, could be listening to music too. But the reason being that if we lay in bed like for hours and we're unable to sleep, that can kind of signal and again train the body, that it's time to stay awake too. But if that's happening, more frequently and regularly, to anybody listening, it's definitely worth talking to your medical doctor about that. And then another thing that I've seen be really helpful for clients is cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT therapy, that can really help with sleep issues too, as well. And, and possibly seeing a therapist, to go through a program like that to really de-stress and calm down the nervous system can be really powerful too, as well.
And you talked earlier when you were talking a little bit more about your own journey, that you had to that you were working with a functional health coach because you went to the root of the problem. And I'm sure you talked about what stressed you, and you were like, okay, it's the grieving of my dad, and the covering up of not wanting maybe to feel those feelings. So I'm sure there was a lot of that feeling through that again as you were working through that. And so I always think when you have sleep issues, it's ask yourself the question why, right? What is coming up when you're really honest with yourself, which is sometimes really hard to do at first, but ask yourself why are you stressed? What is it that really stresses you? Is it your work? Is it your partner? Is it a family, a conflict or a friend conflict, whatever it is, right? Go to the root of that. And I really love journaling. I talk a lot about that all the time. I have a planner that I created specifically for that as well, to kind of foster mental health and creating more awareness around how you're feeling, and and to kind of close out those things. That's a few things that I want to touch on. So first of all, one of the things that resonated and that brought up a thought was when you were saying sometimes when you can't go back to sleep for 20 or 30 minutes, or you can't fall asleep in 20 to 30 minutes, then sometimes it's really hard to do it, because oftentimes we get frustrated in those moments, right? We're laying in bed and we're I'm feeling tired, but I can't fall asleep. And then actually our stress levels go back up. And that's obviously then actually the reason that's keeping us from falling asleep, because our stress increases. And I have gone through periods, and I think it's also situational. You go through times where you maybe have a harder time sleeping. And so I've
Mm-hmm.
experienced it for sure as well, especially as I went through my burnout in 2018. And one of the things that really helped me, made a huge difference, was guided meditation, yoga nidra, breathing. You talked about body scans, because I feel like, again, as peak performers and high achievers, you oftentimes have a very busy mind and you go to sleep. And something, so I have to share that in a second as well. I really resonated. I listened to a podcast last night about evening routines. But first of all, so guided stuff I think is really powerful for me, because I have a busy mind and I can't just go in my mind through the body scan, because I just get distracted and there's like 5 other thoughts that come up and I forget where I just was in my body scan. But guided meditations and yoga nidra has really, really helped me to calm my nervous system, and in 98% of the times, I would say, help me fall asleep. There's a really great app called Insight Timer. It's for free. They obviously have a paid version as well, but I do a lot of their meditations and, breathing for sleep. Or like if you're not into meditations, just listen to like a visualization or a night story. Like there's so many cool things out there now. That really help to kind of distract yourself from those thoughts that keep you up at night.
That's such a great point. And there's so many good apps out there. There's Calm, and Headspace. I mean, there's a million different apps. And to your point, like,
it's great.
Hardly anybody I know is like a yogi, or they can just like sit in a room and think about nothing. And the second you try to think about nothing, it's like, then you're thinking about everything. And so to your point, it's so much easier for most people to just do a 5-minute, 10-minute guided meditation where somebody's just gently, gradually kind of telling you what to think about and let go of and that sort of thing too. Cause it's hard. It's hard when you have an unruly mind. It's hard to control it.
Yeah, for sure. And so I was listening to this podcast kind of, it's interesting how everything relates at the moment, like with the watch and like the podcast I was listening to. But I was listening to this podcast last night, and it was about the morning routine and the evening routine. I'm like really big about that as well. And so the evening routine is really important, and it doesn't really matter if it is at the end of your workday or the end of your day. But one of the things that resonated really strongly with me when I was listening to that was Netflix. I think we all love it. We all love to watch TV, especially at the end of the day. And the podcast host was talking about how, and I oftentimes ask people, what do you do in order to relax? And people tell me, I watch Netflix, I watch a show, I watch YouTube. And I always say, take it with a grain of salt as well, because sometimes you also watch like action shows that increase your stress levels actually, and so you're going to try to go to sleep afterwards, and your adrenaline is so high from watching this like show. I always think of Game of Thrones when I talk about that, because Game of Thrones was so exciting and so stress released, increasing, because there were so many exciting things going on. So it was hard to like all of a sudden just shut down your TV and then go to sleep, right? It's true. Almost not possible because your stress levels are so high in your body. So 2 things about that. So the evening routine, don't just do Netflix, just have like another thing, because one of the things she was saying as well was, when you do Netflix, you kind of distract your thoughts of the things that are actually on your mind and that you're worried about. So if you just go from work immediately into Netflix and you watch a few shows and then you go to bed, and then all of a sudden all of these thoughts come up, it's because you haven't really dealt with the thoughts. You haven't really given yourself that space to wind down. And so one of the things that I love to do is journaling, even if it's just for 5 minutes, to just check in with yourself, or to write down what are the things that I need to do tomorrow, because otherwise you keep them playing in the loop in your head, because maybe you think, I don't want to forget this, or this is really important, right? So writing it down for me helps really strongly to kind of close that out. And then in the kind of more the burnout science and research, we talk a lot about closing out the stress cycle as well, and not having closed out stress cycles, and accumulating those eventually will bring you to burnout. So you always want to think about what is still to close out at the end of the day, like what is still there that might have triggered you, and then obviously choose something that helps you to deal with that, even like either you have a conversation with someone about it, or you journal, or you go for a walk and just let it go, like visualize kind of like this letting go and closing out process in order to make sure that by the end of the day you have really wound down
Yeah.
in order to go back to sleep easier.
I love that, closing it out, because that is, and journaling can be a powerful, or just assessing your to-do list, jotting things down so you don't wake up thinking about them. I've heard often from clients, that they're stressed as they're afraid they're going to, forget something the next day. And so they'll, it can be helpful for them to just keep, a notepad beside their bed and that sort of thing too. I'm like, I geek out on this stuff like you do. And so back to the TV shows, I've really gotten into heart rate variability. Like I said, the last couple years, I love the device HeartMath. And it just calms your nervous system in a even stronger way than just deep breathing. It's kind of like deep breathing on steroids too. And so over the last year, because I am more highly sensitive and empathic and, can absorb things too. But in watching, my husband likes a lot of action shows. And so I was curious, and I was like, okay, well, I'm going to wear my device during, different shows and see, because I could track my breathing. And so I literally had my iPad right in front of me, where the whole time, I'm watching and I'm seeing, the waves and the with heart rate variability, you want these big wave, healthy waves, and they're supposed to be varied. When you're having anxiety or, insomnia or any number of things, they're not the big waves, and they look kind of flatline or jagged and kind of all over the place. But I mean, every single time a stressful scene would come on the TV show, my perfect little waves would start going, really choppy, and my score would start going down, or I'd be in the perfect score, and then it would start going way down. And so I wasn't aware of how, to your point, it's just being mindful of kind of what you're doing in the evening and how you respond to things. Because if you're watching, a super intense movie or a super intense show, it can be just too overstimulating to the body to try to watch that and then go to bed. Yeah, for sure.
I also remember I love Grey's Anatomy.
Oh, I can't do it.
Yeah, same thing. I watched it, and when I started to be more aware of all of the things, right? Because I feel like until 2018, there wasn't too much awareness in that area. Yeah. So I would watch it before bed, and I would watch multiple shows because it was so exciting. But then I watched it I think 2 or 3 years later. I was trying to get back into it, and I was like, I cannot watch this before I go to sleep. It's just there's just too much going on, and it makes me, I'm also super sensitive for stuff like that. But I could not watch it anymore. That was really
I can't. I'm an empath, so I have really high mirror neurons. So if I see that on TV, then I'm having pain in my stomach, or where somebody's arms cut off, or I'm I can't do it. So I just can't do anything that's too gory like that. It's just too much for me, for sure.
Yeah. April, I'm curious, what is kind of next for you? How are you thinking about 2022? Do you have a mission or anything that you're working on that you're really excited about?
Yeah. And so my word of this year really was impact. And so I just kind of felt in my spirit that this year, I needed to get really loud about my story. And so that's where I've been speaking on a lot of different podcasts on, stress and sleep and burnout, and really sharing my story too. And have been writing a whole lot more and been published in a few articles too. Again, just my goal and my mission really is to just be able to help a whole lot more people, avoid the mistakes that I went through, and not have to experience burnout and a health collapse, because it's so preventable. It's definitely, it's one of those things that, burnout doesn't just happen. It's you just wake up one day and you're on fire. It's a series of lots of different habits and things over time that just kind of stack up and stagger and have this kind of domino effect on our health. So there's so much that's within our control to be able to prevent that from ever happening.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. I can totally relate to that. And how can people best connect with you if they're curious to learn more about what you do?
Yeah, I'd love to connect. So listeners can reach out to me on my website at aprillikins.com. I'm on Instagram with a different handle. So my handle on there is Glow Be Lovely. I have a brand new free resource too that I just put out called 15 Ways to Say Goodbye to Chronic Stress. And it's really geared towards just helping people lower their stress levels and find balance in a really practical way. So a lot of the things we talked about are in there. So if you weren't taking avid notes, download that. And that's all my best tips right there too. And if, anybody's listening and they're really struggling with sleep or stress, they're always welcome to set up a discovery call with me too, where we can just kind of chat about what's going on and see if there's a way that I can help. And again, you can connect to my website or on Instagram, either way. Or if anything resonated too, just say hi. I always love hearing from people too. So, drop me a line on social or on my website too. And if I can help in any way, I'm always happy to help.
Great. Well, thank you so much for being here today. I hope that for the listeners, this was a really eye-opening podcast episode about the importance of sleep, all of the different things you can do to maybe influence your sleep in a different way, listen better to your body during the day. And if you know someone that might need to know this information as well, I would really appreciate it. April and I would really appreciate it if you would share this episode, maybe with just one person that's where you're like, wow, this was really powerful. I know this person is struggling with sleep. I'm going to share it with them. We would really appreciate that. So thank you so much for being here today, April. Thank you so much for being here today, listeners. It's always wonderful to have you here. So thank you so much for joining us in this conversation today. And we wish you a wonderful rest of your day.
Yes. Thank you for having me.